literally, once Chris said the word coffee while I was drinking it, I immediately taste. Oh my god!
Do you want to try again?
Hello and welcome to episode 48 of the GameBrew podcast. I am your host, Ian C3PO Richard, and I'm here with Chris R2D2 Writes.
Oh, that's me. I get to be R2? Fuck yeah.
Dude, you gotta do your R2 impression. You can't. Beep, boop, 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 boop. That sounds like R2 in Love. Which actually sounds like a great musical now that I think about it. Dan, HK47 Rots.
That sounds wonderful. You know, don't murder all your friends unless, murder all your friends. It's fine.
And Will BB-8 Shell.
I don't remember what sounds he makes.
It's like R2D2, but with a roly ball on the bottom.
Yeah, it's okay.
That's all I got.
It's fine.
Wait, Ian, what are you?
I'm a C3PO, bro.
Oh, okay, bro. That's
I'm C3PO, bro. Fuck.
I'm C3POs, bros.
Anyway, today on the first half of the show, we're going to be talking about exploration in games and what game developers do to make us want to explore. And in the second half, we'll talk about what makes good games good. But first, it's time for a beer. Chris, what are we drinking this week?
Something from Bell's. A little Kalamazoo action.
And what is Kalamazoo exactly? Aside from a place
stout.
in Michigan? Isn't it in Michigan? Kalamazoo, Michigan?
Sure.
Yes, I think.
Yeah, it's Michigan.
It's a stout. It's a good stout. It says it has licorice in it, but I don't get a whole lot of that.
Guys, I sneakily drank one of these yesterday when I was playing Red Dead
You
Redemption.
bitch!
And I couldn't taste the licorice in it. Which is good because I hate licorice.
The liquor ice.
What? How do you hate licorice?
I also hate licorice, so I'm just gonna.
What?
It's just
clock
that
in my vote for
anise
that.
type, flavor. Not anus,
no.
anise,
Anise.
And it's it's not good. I don't like that smell. I don't like the taste. I don't even like.
Well, it's not for you. It's for me.
It's for Chris.
Since we're prejudging things, and I think we're prejudging this beer on the stout a little bit, can I also say that I really think people stay away from stouts because they prejudge them as heavy and not drinkable, and if you don't know anything about beer, you're like, oh, it's dark, so it's gonna be really bitter, but
it's
they're
gonna
not.
It's gonna be thick, and I don't want that.
If you are if you are new to beer and you want to try something that's just smooth and creamy and makes your mouth as well as your brain happy.
This sounds like some videos I've seen on the internet.
It does?
I think
stouts are a great way to get into beers. I mean, they're not. I had some stouts this weekend at the Johnson City Brewery, and some of them were really sweet, kind of like dessert stouts, but all of them were smooth.
I'm sorry, Will. Is that Johnson City, Tennessee?
Yeah, the one with the wheels and the wagons and stuff.
Got it. Yep.
Yeah, that's the one. That's one.
I kind of disagree. I think they're a very distinct flavor that aren't really related to beer at all.
What?
It tastes more like coffee to me than beer.
No.
Maybe that's why I like it.
I think that
so
depends
much.
on what's in it.
This to me doesn't taste like a very coffee stout at all. This one is
Really?
very, very heavy on the toasted flavor. They really went heavy into that kind of sort of charcoal-y flavor, which I like. I'm not getting the anise, actually.
I have to be in the mood for a stout.
I could drink stouts all day.
As soon as Chris said the word coffee, I was taking a drink and I was like, yeah, I can taste, it tastes like freshly ground coffee. Whenever I taste it, I can taste those beans. I can taste them there beans in it. And that's, it's good. I like that. I love coffee. I had some coffee earlier. Can you tell?
I like a good coffee stout, but I also like a good creamy, kind of like what Ian said, almost like a desserty stout because it's so creamy. I'd love it. I had one with some coconut and chocolate in it. Oh god.
I'm gonna have to publicly ask you to stop saying creamy because it's making me uncomfortable.
Really? I don't understand why.
I don't know.
Could you elucidate what about the word creamy makes you uncomfortable,
but also
Dan?
it's just I don't know the word. Word creamy feels dirty.
That was a college word right there.
I feel like if Dan did describe why creamy made him uncomfortable, it would be a Pyrrhic victory.
Ooh.
That's a word that Chris taught me.
I know that word because I was playing it. Never mind. We'll talk about that later. Actually, no. That's a good way to talk about that now. So I've been playing Total War recently this week.
I didn't even have
Getting
to
some
do
Pyrrhic
the-
victories.
It's perfect. It's great. Some Pyrrhic victories. What is a Pyrrhic victory, Chris?
It's when you win the battle, but you have to do it at a large cost.
Yes, a
So
heavy
it's-
cost.
Yeah, so you might lose a lot of your troops, but you technically win the battle.
So this is Warhammer Total War 2.
2.
And you're playing it on PC?
See?
Uh-huh. And
I don't
you
think
picked
it
up,
is on anything else other
Okay.
than PC.
Did you pick it up on Steam?
Yeah.
So is this one of the great, because one of like a couple years ago, whoever owns the Warhammer IP was like, anybody can buy Warhammer stuff and make a game out of it. We got some really cool stuff. Like that's kind of where Vermintide came from, and also these Total War games. But there are also other spin-offs. Like there was a Space Marine game and like some random other stuff. Is this like from that sort of ilk?
I guess so. I mean, it was really a match that made a whole lot of sense because Total War was always about fielding really big armies, and that's what you do with the tabletop game in Warhammer. So
Sure.
it seemed like a really good fit, and I've loved it. So the second one's really cool because you can, if you also have the first one, Warhammer Total War 1, I guess, you can combine them together basically, so you have a map that's just massive.
Wait, does that make it
Oh.
Warhammer
Any of the
3
factions.
when you put those together?
Sure. They call it Mortal Empires, and you like it's just a massive map.
Ooh.
And that's been really cool. Tyler was over here. We basically played it for 16 hours, like last night and today.
Oh my God! No wonder
How do you
sound
find time
so
to
tired.
do that as an adult?
We see when you plan ahead, you can
and I
set
will
time
say-
aside.
Chris is an excellent planner when it comes to making sure game things happen. I experienced this at MagFest. So I have to think that you also had like not just the games plan, but also like the meals and the beverages and like all of the hookups.
The
and stuff.
beverages, yes. The meals, kind of. But like, I mean, with the setup I have in my apartment, Tyler just came over and used Katie's computer, my girlfriend's computer, and so we can just sit there and like we sit here for hours and just
Chill
playing
out.
Warhammer. It's great.
Nice, man.
Good job.
Dan, what have you been up to, buddy?
Well, buddy, I've been doing the. We get real Canadian on this episode. Well, firstly, I'm on my quest to finish because we made on the last episode we talked about our New Year's resolution to finish games, and I said I gotta finish Red Dead Redemption 2. I thought I was very close. I sent many messages to the GameBrew about how much I was just crying while sitting there playing video games. Because I thought I was.
And we were like, "Are you playing Gris? Are you playing Journey? Are you playing Florence?" And he
I'm
was like, "Nah, bro.
"No, I'm playing Red Dead
Rootin' tootin'
Redemption
cowboy
2."
shooting."
But it's it's I don't want to spoil like story stuff for people, but it's got some moments. But also
Yeah?
once you finish it in quote,
Quote,
I'm doing
unquote.
air quotes.
Yeah.
There's an epilogue, and I was like, okay, maybe it's just like a little epilogue. And no, it's like more game. It's just more. Like I looked at the achievements and I was like, there's still 3 achievements that are hidden that I haven't gotten to. But I also played a little bit of the Resident Evil 2 demo, their little one-shot demo they had.
Right. It's supposed to be like half an hour, but people were speed running it.
I was trying to go as fast as I could to get through this shit. But it's great. It's not like the re-releases that came before, like with Resident Evil and Resident Evil 0, because those still had like the shitty tank controls. It was basically just the same game but with better graphics. And tank controls means like you go forward doesn't go up on the screen. It makes you go wherever you're facing as a character, and you can only like stop, turn left or right, and go forward. You could kind of change on some stuff.
So my question is, so new controls, right? It's like regular sort of like over the shoulder third person control scheme, and then also the camera is not fixed? Question mark.
The camera is not. Hold on, recalling in my brain head. The camera is not super fixed. No, there are some points where it's like in a specific place, but it's like Resident Evil 4. If you play Resident Evil 4, it's like that. Of course, Leon is in his classic like RCPD outfit, and he's a little bit younger, but
Leon.
Yeah, yo, Leon
Good
Kennedy's a
old
fucking
Leo.
badass. One of my favorite Resident Evil characters.
I was also always partial to the. I don't even remember their names now, but I was always partial to the Resident Evil 1 characters.
Like Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Chris Redfield is my bruh forever.
Yeah. Well, there's also Barry. Barry was in that one too. He was like your buddy who survives all the way to the end, who's just like your buddy who like runs around the mansion with you and is just like,
Barry.
I couldn't find anything. And I'm like, I found this key. And like, I
I
found
thought-
a shotgun here.
The whole time Barry was there, I was always like, he's in on it. Like Barry's fucking in on the shit. It's the only reason he's
Yeah?
still alive.
But then at the end, you're like, oh, fucking Wesker, you son of a bitch.
Anyway, Will, what about you, buddy? What have you been doing?
I have been so two things happened simultaneously within the past week and a half of my life. I listened to a Planet Money podcast that was really interesting about Magic the Gathering. And I'd been playing on my phone for a little bit, I'd mentioned several episodes ago. And then that same week, you had mentioned that you were getting really into Magic the Gathering, the Arena on PC. So I dove into that, and I've been playing a decent bit of that. But I've also been into the cards, like full force. And I don't know what it is. I guess it's the collector in me. I like the Arena online, but it's not as much... There's something about it that's not as satisfying to me as having the cards and playing with something tactile. I will say that the Arena is great for being able to play whenever you want to. I mean, because Magic players, as many of them as there are, you can't just sit down and play unless you live with or near people who also play with you.
Or you go to a game store.
Or you go to a game store.
Most game
but
stores have Magic the Gathering nights that you can go to.
Yeah, but those are limited, and you can't always go to those. If you just want to sit down and play for like 5 minutes, you don't want to dedicate hours to it like you would at a game night.
Right.
The Arena is great. It's really great, and it even lets you port over some of your cards. It's not all cards, but if you own some physical cards, like I bought a RAL Planeswalker deck from Ravnica.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh, the
it's got a
Planeswalker is...
Yeah, and it's
That's
got
cool.
a little it's a great deck, and it's got a little card in there. You type in the code and you are supposed to get those cards online, but unfortunately that doesn't exist for everything. It would be cool if it did, because I own a lot of cards that I could just have
Plug in.
online.
Yeah.
So that's a little disappointing. I understand from a business perspective why they haven't done that, but it's sticking to the video game medium. It's really slick. I mean, you can talk about this as well. It's well done. It has a certain tactile feel to it in the sounds and the way that the cards mesh and interact, and it's been really good.
It's the first time in a long time that Wizards of the Coast has nailed a video game version of Magic the Gathering, and I think what
Absolutely.
was especially smart about it is that they catered to being precise, and they catered to like making sure the game felt good. Previous Magic the Gathering titles on like in video game format have always had some sort of gimmick associated with them, and largely they didn't pan out. I think when they were very first, they were getting into Planeswalkers back in like original PlayStation era, there was like one Planeswalkers game that felt good, and the rest of it was just garbage because they didn't get the fundamentals right, and they focused on the fundamentals and they got it right, and it feels really great.
Absolutely. Oh, it's I've been having a blast with it. It's a ton of fun. I've even got Molly into it. She's played it probably more than me at this point.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Okay, so yeah, I'll transition in here then. I have been playing things that I've been playing before. The one thing that I just did want to update is I got back into Sea of Thieves with my brother, and there is they expanded, and there's a new area that has like a bunch of new challenges and stuff, and I don't want to ruin any of the surprises, but it's basically like Volcano Ash Deathland, and it's really cool.
That
And it's
sounds
a lot
like a fun place to be.
it's a lot more challenging than the original missions, which makes it a little bit more interesting, I think. And they also scaled some of the random encounters so that they fit more with two players. It's just, I know I keep saying this, but every time Sea of Thieves does a new thing, I'm like, we should all get back into it because I think we'd have a great time. I actually
Have
think
they
it'd
added
be
any more instruments?
Yeah, are there any more instruments?
There's a drum now? Was there a drum before?
No. So that's new.
There you go, drum.
That's one thing that Fallout nailed was that they had a tuba.
That's
Yeah.
true.
True.
Yeah, get at
True,
at me whenever you get a tuba, Sea of Thieves.
At me
Fuck.
whenever-
Yeah.
All right.
That'll make me buy the game.
Tuba me, bro.
So, the first topic today that we wanted to talk about was exploration, and I just want to say, like, exploration is one of my favorite things about video games. There's nothing quite like being dropped into a brand new world, looking at the horizon, and thinking, I want to go there. But what is it that games do to incentivize exploring? What do developers do to incentivize exploring, and why is it important to gameplay?
This is tough for me because I really like storytelling.
Yeah.
And I am one who will plow through the environment and not give it much thought, really, unless something just like is designed to really stick out for the person like me who doesn't pay attention to the environment, like the in The Last of Us, the giraffes. The giraffes.
I haven't played The Last of Us, sorry.
Just refresh me.
Oh my god, the giraffes.
Tell us about these giraffes.
The giraffes, and you're like,
Can't spoil it.
been through all this
9-year-old
stressful stuff.
This is
and,
where Resident Evil 6 and The Last of Us do a crossover.
yes.
Resident Evil giraffe.
No.
You have to say it like that.
This is where, so there's a giraffe scene. I don't remember what leads up to it because it's been a while since I played, but you get on, you're like on this rooftop and you made it through all this horrible stuff and you're far enough into the story now, like 2/3 of the way through, where you've really got some character development going on between the two characters, and there's just this moment, and it's almost like a father-daughter moment where all of that pauses and goes away, and you've got this beautiful, like one of the only beautiful scenes in the game, period, where you've got a giraffe, and there's nothing alive. There's like no living things in this world, and you've got this giraffe
Just wandering
walking
by.
through. I think it's just a couple of, and it's just the way it's presented and the cinematography behind it and just the moment that's created is beautiful. Things
so
like
how
that make
does
me
that-
appreciate the scenery.
But how does that connect to exploring exactly?
It doesn't. That makes me notice the scenery. And what I was saying is I'm a person who doesn't notice that. So it's hard for me to want to explore.
Oh,
When
I
you-
see. Like
Yes.
you needed it to be dropped right in front of
I
you for you to
needed
know-
it to
Yeah, I
be
see.
dropped right in front of me because all I'd noticed through the game up to that point is just, the darkness and getting through the story to that next chunk of story. I wanted more, and the environment was really a secondary to me that I'm sure I subconsciously noticed and was engrossed in, but I don't consciously seek out to explore. I consciously seek out to progress.
So you've played some of Breath of the Wild, right?
Yeah.
When you're looking for like shrines, do you just like stumble upon them, or do they have to be placed in front of you?
For shrines, I'll get up to something high. So I guess I explore in that, but I don't really think of it in terms of appreciating the environment. I think of it in terms of progressing to the next shrine because I want to knock out all the shrines. So I just get up to some high point, mark some shrines, and then boogie on over to it, and then
Gotcha.
slap some
Okay.
shit around and go on. But it's not about the environment for me. There are some pretty scenes.
Right. I mean, for me, one of the things I really like is finding something that wasn't supposed to be obvious. So it's kind of like the opposite of what how you're feeling. So like I like it makes it kind of like almost a special moment, and I'm going somewhere that is off the beaten path. And I think it also it's related to, I guess, how I play video games. So I usually play games in a semi-completionist way. So like I try to make sure before I move on to a point where I can't go further or I can't go back, I want to get everything done before I do that. So like in Red Dead Redemption, I try to make sure I hit all the missions I can before going on to the next chapter, instead of just going.
Yeah, and that's tough in Red Dead Redemption because there might be like some things, because you like don't want to go somewhere or do something, but there are some like missions and stuff that don't pop up unless you, like my brother has gotten missions or like has been sending things to somebody that I have never met. So I'm like, I don't know what I didn't do, but I didn't do it.
Yeah, and it's kind of the same way when I play The Witcher or like Skyrim. It takes forever for me to get through those games because I'm trying to do everything. And I don't know why I do that, but I just do.
Okay.
My question is like, again, how does that relate to exploring or wanting to explore? Is that sense of completionism because you couldn't stand to move on without having experienced something else? Like in a game like Breath of the Wild, do you also explore every nook and cranny of one small area before you move on to the next thing, or is it kind of a little bit more free form?
It's a little bit more freeform. Like for me, I'm just kind of bouncing off of landmarks in Breath of the Wild.
What makes a good landmark? I think this is an interesting question too.
You know the two, like I think they're called not
Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
Damn good coffee.
Like the really big mountain that's got a cut through it with like a river.
Yeah,
it's one of the first
exactly
things you see after you fly off the first plateau. That's a huge landmark. You know there's something up there. You know, and like it's kind of a challenge to get up there. And I loved going up there.
Is it seeing that itself that made you think like, I gotta climb that mountain, or was it something else that made you want to get up there?
Well, I liked getting up there because I also like flying and like floating.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, that's like the biggest thing I can fly off of, so I'm gonna go up there.
That's interesting. So it was actually a gameplay mechanic that made you want to explore. It wasn't necessarily like if there was an item up there.
I mean, I just assumed there was, just because if there's a massive landmark, it's there for a reason. It was put there by developers. There's something up there.
Sure.
One of the things like with that's different from that sometimes with RDR2 is that you go in and sometimes the random exploring is more beneficial. Like when I'm chasing a deer somewhere, or like I'm like hunting. I was like, oh, I found a perfect deer I'm gonna hunt, and I scare it away, and then I follow it, and then I'm like, oh, what the hell is this? Oh, look, I found some dinosaur bones, because I wasn't paying attention to like where I was going, and I had no idea it was there, but it was just like in the middle of a forest somewhere.
You stumbled upon it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that Rockstar's really good at, is they put really good hints at just story things, or they put hints at like random stuff just in the world. There's a bunch of stories that you can kind of follow in RDR2, just like you could in GTA 5, and I think the first Red Dead Redemption as well, just by exploring what's in the world. Like, not necessarily outright stories, but there's like an area, what's the place called? Green something farm. Emerald Ranch. So in Emerald Ranch, there's this whole ranch. There's like a ranch house there. It's a kind of a weird place. And there's all these rumors about it, but you don't really figure out what's going on there. That makes it so kind of weird and uncomfortable. But I found an abandoned mail cart in the world that had a letter to somebody at that ranch saying that, oh, their husband died in a bar shootout, or like in a bar fight. And then I went to that bar in Emerald Ranch that's been abandoned, but there's a bunch of bullet holes in it, and there's a grave behind it that has this woman's like fiance's name in it. And she's also a woman who's been standing in the window of this, like you can see her sometimes standing in a window in the house at this ranch every once in a while, just kind of looking out. But it's not a story quest. There's no story or quest things related to it. It's just a thing in the world. And it's so weird.
That's one of the interesting things, and I think one of the things that makes a strong exploration component risky from a developer standpoint is that in order for it to feel like exploration, you have to stumble upon it, which means that stuff is going to be missed by the average player. You're literally developing content that no one ever is going to see.
I wonder if that's disappointing for them.
I bet it is.
Well, one of the games that probably got me the most into exploring, although I was still very like, gotta get through the story. I just rolled credits on Spider-Man on PS4.
Oh, nice!
You finished it?
Recently.
Nice.
Oh God.
Wait, you did? Hold on, we got to put the ding sound in.
Good.
We got to put the ding sound in for Will finishing a game in 2019.
Ding.
Ba-da!
One down. And
how long is it?
First of all, such a great game. If you just plowed through the main story, you could crush that out in probably 15 hours. 12 to 15 hours, you're pretty adept. You don't need to do side stuff.
It says main story is 16 hours. Is that do you feel that's a medium game?
That's a medium
game.
I took over 20 hours. I did all the side quests, which are purely optional. That's a game where having the extra abilities helps, but you don't really need it to progress through. But I digress. The environment in that game, I don't think it's a 1-to-1 representation of Manhattan, but good God, is it close, and it's so much fun. They nailed traversal in that game, and that was a game where I actively chose to not fast travel 95% of the time, because it's just flat out fun to tear ass through Manhattan swinging around as Spider-Man. And that's a game where I actively sought out. It has photo mode, which other games do too, Odyssey does, but this one, when you go into photo mode, it's like it re-renders the graphics and everything is just drop dead gorgeous. And that's a game where I purposefully explored and sought out cool ways to take photos, and I've just got a plethora of photos from photo mode from
that's
that.
Really cool.
And so I don't know if that counts quite as exploring, but I was looking for those cool landmarks or perspectives, and I was constantly hitting the pause button trying to catch myself in a cool Spider-Man pose or with a cool background to take pictures with. And I must have done this for hours, and that was a lot of fun to me.
Nice.
And you mentioned something that I thought was interesting about how you weren't fast traveling a lot in that game.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, that fast travel is like the anti-exploration, like in games. And like I feel like for a really long time, every game had fast travel, and it was just being overused. And I feel like it's kind of rolling back a little bit. Like,
a little bit.
I really like when there are controlled fast travel. So like in The Witcher, you have to go to a signpost before you can fast travel. I think the same thing in Red Dead Redemption 2. You have to get a cart. You can't just
if you get a cart or get on a train or something.
Right. You have
to get there first.
Right. Well, and not even first, but like you can't just open up your map in game and fast travel. You have to go to certain points, and I think that promotes exploration.
One of the side effects, Ian had mentioned unexplored content, and 99% of the time in Spider-Man, your feet don't touch the ground, but there's a few instances where they have to, and I noticed, like, there's general chatter and people you can kind of mildly interact with, but one of the cooler things I noticed is I went by a newspaper thing and caught my little triangle button pop up that you can interact with that, and you can actually run around the city and open up the little newspaper dispensers and read the Daily Bugle.
What?
Through. And that's not part of anything else. I just happened to be right in a spot running for a little bit and catch that, and that's in no other part of the game, and it was really, it was like a neat little Easter egg. You don't have to do it, but somebody put the effort to put that in there, and I remember thinking, oh, this is really cool. But this is also a game I really, really got into as a comic book fan.
So one of the other things that I wonder about exploration is kind of its connection to the fear of the unknown and how they're sort of opposites, right? Exploration is something where you feel like, I'm going to go explore things, and you sort of like trot off with your little stick in your bag over your shoulder. And the fear of the unknown is also unknown that we find stimulating, but it's in a completely different way than exploration. And so I'm just wondering, like, what is it about the fear of the unknown that's interesting to us, and is it a form of exploration? And maybe Dan, because you play a lot of horror games.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's the big thing with horror. I mean, with horror games and with like that whole genre is all about, like, there's something that's not right. It gives you horror as a genre gives you, here's a regular situation, and then we're going to put something in it that isn't regular. So whether that be a ghost, whether it be a murderer, whether it be like some sort of otherworldly entity, or just a person who is scary, whatever that is, that makes it kind of makes that part of your brain go off, like something's not right, like something is a little off. And that's kind of I think that's the whole premise behind the Silent Hill series too, where it's like it's like a familiar environment, but it changes to make it familiar but unfamiliar.
Do you do as much exploring in horror games as you do in other games, or do you tend to not because you are afraid?
Well, in horror games, I do a little bit more, just because, well, it's hard. That's hard to quantify, because I too like to find all the things like Chris does. Like, Chris is a completionist. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily a completionist, but I don't like missing stuff. So when I played The Evil Within 2, the first one didn't have any open world elements. The second one did. And in the second one, I spent a lot of time trying to find all the stuff in those open world areas. Because one, it was different. And number two, because I wanted to get all the things. And because I knew some of the stuff that I found would help me not die. And not dying is a big part of survival horror.
A big part of living.
Yes.
And as they say, you either get busy living
or you get busy dying. That's a Texas size 10-4, good buddy.
So, was there ever a time, maybe this is our closing out question, was there ever a time where you played a game that had exploration but you felt like it shouldn't have had it? Where exploration let you down? And I have an example in my mind, but...
What's your example? I want to know what that is first.
Dragon Age 3 Inquisition.
Okay.
I was really looking forward to that game and looking forward to exploring that game.
Yikes.
And then because everything in that game was turned up to 11 in terms of like, there's a quest for this, and there's a task for this, and then behind the task there's an achievement for this, and behind that there's a this, like every single thing was so incentivized and so like go here, go here, go here, go here, that I felt like it didn't leave any room for exploration. And that's the thing that I loved about those games in the first place, that you could a little bit at least kind of wander off the beaten path and find unexpected things.
Would you say that the exploration in that took you down too many extra pathways and was just distracting from your exploring?
That, and also it didn't feel like exploring because there was
just
always
handed to
a
you.
reason for me to be there. Exactly, yeah.
Gotcha. You didn't have the freedom to just go. Okay, I understand that.
Okay.
By the time I wanted to go somewhere, I had already been told I should go there.
That's
Gotcha.
frustrating. That is frustrating.
Yeah.
I think mine is mostly the promise of exploration but not getting it from Fable, like the Fable series.
Yes,
whenever
I
they
feel
say-
that really hard.
Like whenever they say it's an open world game and then there's
It's
not
not.
really any open worldness to it, like
Yeah.
fuck you, Peter Molyneux. You know? No offense putting you on a personal level, but fuck you, dude. You know?
Yeah.
That's rude.
Mine actually might surprise everyone. Mass Effect.
The
I get it.
original.
I get it.
Yeah, Mass Effect, because exploration in that, it was pretty linear.
Yeah.
Overall.
Yeah, it was
You,
pretty linear.
You got to a box, you explored within that box, then you took a straight line to the next box and did that. But you could get on planets and use your little Mars rover thing, whatever they called it. The Warthog. Get the Warthog! And you could, in quotations, explore the planet, but there was dick there.
Yeah, there was nothing.
They were
nothing
pretty
you could
empty.
do.
Yeah.
They were very, very barren.
Wasn't it?
I will point
didn't
out
like
that that's probably accurate to how most planets are.
True.
Yeah, but from a gameplay perspective, it was really boring.
Will, remind me, because you've played all of them. In Mass Effect
Yeah.
1, couldn't you, like, get in your car and, like, go to every planet you went to and drive around even if there
Yeah.
wasn't shit to do?
Yeah, you could.
I think most planets, if I remember correctly, there were a few that you could not
Yeah.
drop down
Like
on
gas
and
giants.
go. Yeah,
Yeah.
gas giants and stuff. But yeah, you could. And
I think in 2 and 3 they took that out. They were just like, oh, yeah.
They did.
If it's not
They
a
did.
planet
It was
you
just like
can't
a
go
scan.
to. Yeah.
yeah,
Like, you just
had a
used the scanner on your
That's-
ship.
You could still go down, but in 2 at least. I don't remember 3 to be honest.
I mean,
No, they didn't have the rover in 2.
listen, I
There's
think it's a good idea for
there's
everyone
no
to go
reason
down.
to do it.
All right, so that's going to be it for the first half of the show. When we come back, we're going to talk about what makes good games good. Stick with us.
Hey, it's Chris from the GameBrew. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. You guys are the best. We'd love to hear from you, so don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at The GameBrew. That's one word. While you're at it, why not click that share button so your friends can have a listen too? Oh, and if you're hankering to buy some new games, why not support a charity of your choice and us all at the same time? Go check out Humble Bundle through the link bit.ly/GameBrew, that's bit.ly/GameBrew, and see what deals they got going on. Well, I guess that's enough shameless self-promoting. On to the second half of the show.
welcome back to the second half of the GameBrew podcast. Just checking in with the beer here. Remind me what we're drinking again this week?
Bell's Kalamazoo.
And it's named after where they started brewing, is that correct? So this is like a legacy beer for them, I guess.
It's like hey, this is where we're from, and we brew some good
it is
shit.
one of their
So
classic.
here
This
you
is
go.
why we're hot.
Yeah, it's super. It is a full-bodied beer. There's no question about that. And I bought one of each of their currently in production stouts, so I have their Expedition and their Kalamazoo and their Cherry. So I just cracked open the Expedition, and this is much more classic, like Russian Imperial Stout tasting stout.
You'd think it would be more adventurous.
You would think so, but it's really not. This is much more run-of-the-mill stout.
It is. The Expedition is very strong. Like that, you drink it, you feel it's an Imperial Stout. You know, because Imperial Stouts are definitely a lot more alcoholic in their tendencies.
I did not know that, but you are correct. It's also like a little bit sweeter and a little bit more chocolatier and less like toasted flavor.
And I like the toasted more than I like the Imperials. Like Imperial Stouts are great, but they're not my joie de vivre. They're not my.
They're not your flagon of beer.
They're not my flagon of beer. Instead, I like something that's a little toasty, a little coffee-y, a little creamy. Ugh. It hurts me to say that.
How's everybody else doing with the beer?
I have a bad aftertaste at the moment.
Oh,
Yeah, I can feel
I think
that.
I just need to eat dinner, and I've just got like a beery sort of like,
You haven't eaten dinner yet?
no.
I haven't
Oh
either.
my god.
It's one of those things that's like really good at the time, and I have to keep having more beer to keep the aftertaste out of my mouth. I just don't
Yeah.
have a good aftertaste right
Yeah.
now.
Oh my goodness
I
gracious.
feel you.
Stop feeling him, Chris. Ugh,
but
that's gross.
overall, we think that the beer is good. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I like it.
And
Is-
what
is it
about it?
bitter?
What about it makes it a good beer?
That there's alcohol in it.
For
So
me,
fundamentally, by being a beer, it is good to Chris.
no.
Chris, let me ask you a question in terms of me transitioning to the next topic. Is it the same for games? Do you think that fundamentally a game is good because it is a game?
No, they're bad games.
So it's different.
No, with beer, at least it'll be alcohol. So, you'll get something out of it. There are games that, you play it and you're like, I'm not getting anything out of this. Why am I putting myself through this?
That's
so
true.
this is topic 2, and the question is, what makes a good game good? I was just in terms of a little story here. I was playing Gorogoa again with my mom over Christmas break, and Gorogoa is a puzzle game that has incredibly simple mechanics, but also tends to be kind of challenging. And I was thinking, playing it the art is pretty simple. The gameplay is basically either clicking on things or moving panels to the side. And I was sitting there a little bit perplexed with myself, thinking, why do I like this? What about this is good? It is good, but why?
It are good. Why good?
And
No.
Yeah, so
Survey
Grognak
says-
has clearly described the topic. What makes a good game good? I don't know. That's the question.
well, no, that's what we're saying. Why you start? Why is Gorogoa good?
Why? Well, Gorogoa is good to me because Gorogoa is really. It does this thing where it unfolds like a flower unfolds in terms of gameplay, or everybody knows the concept of spiral curriculum, right? Where you teach a topic and then you teach the basic version, and then you teach a bunch of other stuff, and then you come back around to that same topic that you taught, but it's just a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, like a spiral staircase.
It's like what
Yeah.
Dr. Ballstad did for his rehearsals. He did the macro, micro, macro.
Kind of, but
That's
it's
a little
more,
different.
It's
Okay.
more about revisiting the same thing in a slightly different way that challenges you in a slightly different
Yeah,
way.
it
And
builds
Gor-
upon prior knowledge.
Exactly.
Also,
and Gor-
shout out to Dr. Bolstad, who
Shout
doesn't
out.
listen to the podcast probably,
but should.
but should.
So Gorogoa does a really good job of saying hey, this is a mechanic, and then asking you to apply that mechanic in different ways. For example, pretty early on, it shows you oh, you can split two panes into one, and then you have one screen that's like an empty door, and then you have another screen that's whatever was behind that empty door, and then you layer them on top of each other in different ways, and then later on you're pulling screens together to like complete a tree branch, and then you completing the tree branch triggers an animation that does something else. So it gives you an idea of what to do and then asks you to take the next step from that idea. And it does the same thing in terms of, I'm going to put this in quotes, the story of Gorogoa, where it gives you kind of like an overview at the beginning and hints at things, and then slowly keeps coming around back to it to say like, yes, this is what it's about. Like, yes, it's really a story about XYZ. I don't want to ruin it because it's really interesting.
Hashtag no spoilers.
So what makes that game good to me is that it develops on the basic things that it sets out from the beginning. And also that like the developers just chose to have a simple scope and like nailed it. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that games make right now, is that everybody's all jazzed on having gargantuan scope and epic stories and huge worlds and infinite items, and then none of it really feels satisfying because they're just doing too much.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's kind of hitting the nail on the head. Like, you're talking about how this game does what it does really well, and that means it was planned out that way. It was planned to do these things. They didn't just set out to make a game. Well, what kind of game do we want to make? Well, let's make it a puzzle game. Okay, cool. I like puzzle games. Like they had a direction that they want and a story to tell, and they made it exactly to that. I think that's how the best games are made, is that they have a story to tell. They know what direction they're going. They're not just adding bits here and there. Ubisoft had struggled with this for a while when they were pumping out games like Far Cry and Assassin's Creed for a while. They just started adding stuff on because they thought, well, we got to do something different. And that made the game less focused and less good.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you, Chris, was a lot of the games that I've played in the past like year or so that I've really loved have been by smaller independent developers. And do you think... So my question is, do you think that being a large developer makes it harder to make a great game?
It can be, I think, because it's a lot of competing ideas all the time. You have a team of people that might not have in their head what might be good, versus with a smaller indie group, you have maybe one guy kind of leading the direction, and if it's a good direction, it can be really good. And it's a lot more difficult to have multiple people that are driving it be together as one, you know?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, and that's like story-wise and like game-wise, sometimes it's a good idea. But like Fortnite is still huge. Like, would you say that's not a good game, or would you say that's a good game still? Like,
Are you asking me?
I'm asking everyone. Like, would you say that Fortnite is a good game in general?
Not for me.
Not for
you?
me either.
You're not Battle Royale people?
No, I really liked PUBG a lot. And
Okay.
I think about going to pick up Black Ops just because of the Battle Royale mode. But to me, there's nothing about Fortnite outside of its social prevalence that makes me interested in playing it.
That's interesting. Because Fortnite is a game that had a game type and then saw the Battle Royale mode
That's
taking
true.
off,
That's
and was
true.
like, hey, we can use this. So they jumped on the bandwagon and now are the king of the band. They kicked the driver out, which was PUBG, and are now like in charge of the wagon. So it's kind of like...
Let me
yeah.
ask you that question back. Do you think Fortnite's a good game?
I think Fortnite, as I have... Ironically, I've never played Fortnite like the one versus
survival mode,
like survival mode stuff. But I
have to pay for it.
Because you have to pay for it. But I have played the Battle Royale version, which I have paid probably more money for, arguably, and it's fun. Like, it's fun and simple while still being complex, which is kind of what makes it fun.
Dan, you hedged. Is it a good game?
Is it a good game? I think so, yes.
What makes it a good game, Dan?
That it's fun and challenging.
Okay, what makes it fun?
The funness comes from it being challenging.
Well,
No,
what I'm trying
no.
to get at is what is the fundamental thing about Fortnite that makes it good? It's not good because it's challenging. There's a ton of challenging games out there. Not all of them are good.
The thing that's fun about Fortnite is that one is you can play it with your friends. Like things that you can play with people you know always makes it more fun. Whether it's board games, whether it's video games, whether it's outdoor games, basketball. Hey, play basketball. That's a fun game.
Reindeer games.
It's a good movie with Ben Affleck in it, but
Hunger Games.
Not so much. But that's one. That's a couple of things about it.
You're drunk.
Shut up.
So playing it together is another thing where it's not like uniquely Fortnite, or it's not something Fortnite does uniquely well. And that's what I'm trying to get at. Like, I don't like, why is it fundamentally good? What is the fundamental aspect of Fortnite that makes it good?
Well executed.
It's well executed. Yeah, exactly.
Chris hits on a good point with well executed, and what I was going to say is I'm thinking about this topic in a little bit of a different way. I'm not really thinking about it from the player's perspective, because from the player's perspective, what makes a good game is something that is engrossing and checks our boxes as good story. In the case of Fortnite, I think it's engrossing for people who need fast-paced action, and like a younger audience, I think, is who gears towards that, whereas I'm older and I want story. And I think about this topic, what makes things work in games and the good execution are the people behind the scenes. I mean, for example, a bunch of us are playing Magic right now. That game was invented by a mathematician. Tetris, Bejeweled, Candy Crush. There is a mathematician somewhere along the lines behind that to make that work. Otherwise, it won't work. You have to mathematically figure that stuff out for it to check the boxes of enough of a teaser to keep people going for things like Tetris. It's like, ooh, okay, I'm going to get the piece I need. Or, ooh, a banana's going to fall next in Candy Crush. EVE Online is the same thing. They hire actual economists for people who are into the economy in EVE. Real, actual, I went to college and have a damn degree economists to help design and run that game. And I think all that back-end stuff that you don't notice is what makes a game quote-unquote fun, because you don't actively think about it, but those are things that make it an engrossing experience. It's all that back-end execution that you sort of fall into and are wrapped around, and you're just engrossed in that world of.
That's interesting. So something with an incredible amount of back-end execution, but really poor forward-facing visuals. The thing that comes to mind is Dwarf Fortress. I understand that not everyone has played Dwarf Fortress. Have you played Dwarf Fortress, Will?
No, not yet.
Okay. I'll describe it. It's basically like, have you played RimWorld?
No. I've seen it, but I haven't played it.
Okay, so it's like that. It's basically like top-down, quote-unquote, viewpoint. You're looking at like your 7 little dwarves, and they're running around taking your commands and building things, and you're basically just trying to keep them alive and grow your fort. That's it, Dwarf Fortress. But the thing about Dwarf Fortress is that every single action has a reaction, and in ways that you wouldn't even think about. Like, there's this famous article about Dwarf Fortress where, like, there's pets, and so, like, and one of your main jobs as a dwarf is to brew beer, because dwarves.
Whoa.
That's
With
racist
dwarven
as shit,
racism, dude.
dude.
Come on.
Hashtag dwarven racism.
One of the
That's
things that was
episode title.
happening that was an unexpected outcome was that your cats were getting drunk because they were walking in the beer that the dwarves were spilling and then licking themselves clean. And like that's the thing about Dwarf Fortress, is that all of these reactions and interactions are built in, but it's literally ASCII 2 graphics. Like, it's the symbols on your keyboard is how you look at the game.
That's a great injection of humor into the game, though, and that's something that we don't think about. I wouldn't sit down and process that as, oh, this is so much fun because the developers put humor in the game. I would just like laugh and think, this is awesome, this is cool, let's feed the cats more beer. And we just sort of passively notice those things, and that's great. I love that.
So what about games that aren't like humorous or fun, like Dark Souls? I know, Will, you don't like Dark Souls.
It is humorous and fun.
I agree, but
What do you,
Will does not like
that
Dark
game
Souls.
is dark and
I don't.
hilarious.
Will does not like Dark Souls.
No.
And it is widely accepted as one of the hardest yet most satisfying games that you can play. So why is it not fun for you, Will? I know you've said it before, but I want you to reiterate what.
It's not
It's
fun
not
for
fun.
me because it beats me into the ground and it doesn't explain.
Why do you let
things.
it?
Well, it's different. People relate it to like old school games on NES, like Battletoads, where there's really no instructions. It's just you start and you figure it out as you go. But in that game, what always got me about Dark Souls was the control scheme for it. Not that it's overtly complicated, but there's enough buttons on the controller that it's different than up, down, left, right, and A and B. And
Yeah, but you
That's
play a
simple
lot
What
to
of
amount of
figure
buttons do you have for Gears of War or
Well,
in
and-
any game? You know, like
like
yeah,
you
but
play
they explain it.
Sure, but you play games that have more complicated control schemes. I think that like Counter-Strike is a perfect example of a game that
Yeah, but-
asks you to master the controls that you still like, right? So I think the question is, do you think that Dark Souls is a good game? And if no matter what your answer, why or why not?
No, I don't think it's a good game for me. It is for plenty of people who are willing to do that. But again, all these other games have either extremely, like a big backlog of normalcy. Like in the case of Counter-Strike, first-person shooters have been around forever. There's very little that's different there in terms of control schemes. Like this is just... There's a certain amount of hand-holding that I think is necessary in a game to get people interested in said game in terms of progressing and being able to play the game. And in the case of Dark Souls, I felt like I could never play the game because I didn't know what to do. Like inventory management, nothing. Like you can find a white rock, like a soapstone, and a twig from a blueberry fig tree, and like you can combine those and you can go to fairyland where everyone's
No, you can't.
like,
You can't do that in the game. I
but
don't
there's
know what
no
you're
instructions to say, oh, take the fig tree thing and the soapstone and rub them together and you get a gene. Like there's nothing.
I have never
you
seen
literally
these.
are 100% in the dark, and I think that's ridiculous.
So
I hate
I
it.
just kind of thought about this when you were talking about it. Yeah, the way that you were talking about exploration, I feel like is kind of related to this because you said you're not a big explorer and you like it when the story is kind of brought to you instead of you having to search for the story, I guess.
Absolutely, that's probably
You want the
another reason I don't
instructions
like
brought
it.
to you instead of you having to figure out the instructions, and that
Yeah.
probably makes sense why you don't like Dark Souls because it doesn't give you that. And
I
like,
think
even,
that makes perfect
even the
sense.
story in Dark Souls doesn't give you that.
Chris knows me better than me.
The story in Dark Souls is very much like the subtle parts of RDR2, which is where you have to go looking for it. They don't
Well,
just give it to you.
And even more arcane than that, I think the beauty of the story in Dark Souls is that it's incredibly open to interpretation. If you go who was the guy I was watching on YouTube? There's an entire YouTube series, I'll try and link it in the description, where this guy just goes through Dark Souls lore and he gets really deep into it and bases his assumptions of the story of the lore on actual items in the game. So it's all based in the game, but even within that, there's so few signposts for the story that there are many ways that you can interpret it, which I actually love because it keeps the characters complex. And like, again, with exploration, one of the things is that like as soon as you explored everything, there's no more wonder left. And so it's the same thing with the story. There's still shadow, there's still darkness, and therefore you can never therefore there's still interest there because you don't really know.
I have a question.
Dan has a question.
I have a question.
What's your question?
I have a question.
Listen, you guys, listen. No, I have a question.
Too much vodka.
Which
Listen,
button
Dan.
lets me out of this room? No. So, Candy Crush, probably
Yes.
the most popular game
Period.
for the last 8 years or whatever
Since Angry
Sure.
Birds.
since Angry Birds. Is that a good game?
No.
I'm
Not
tempted
for
to say
me.
yes.
It is a
Ugh.
well-designed game, and I would call it like universally, like on a blanket spectrum, a good game because it is well-designed,
yeah,
or
so
it would
then,
not
Will,
be
that
so
would-
successful. But for me personally, no. But yes, it is a well-designed game.
Okay, so then I would say that would be a yes as a good game.
Sure.
Yeah, and I would say the same about Dark Souls before. It's just, for me personally, it's not
Right.
a good.
So what's
those
your
are not
point,
good
Dan?
games.
Well, because I think we spend a lot of time talking about like, oh, the story, oh, the development, oh, it's so hard to do. But like, Candy Crush is widely accepted as one of the most one of the most lucrative games
Successful.
for a company.
Sure,
like
yeah.
successful games. Secondly, it's one of the most simple. It's basically a matching game, but with different mechanics placed in every different round that you have.
And
Sure.
that brings up a really good point. I mean, there are games that from arcade games from the past, like what's the game that you like, Ian?
Asteroids.
Well, Asteroids, or the beer one, the
Oh,
Ice Cold
yeah,
Beer.
Ice Cold
There's
Beer.
no story. You're just
No.
Yeah, it's
trying to
getting
put a
ice
ball
cold
into
beer.
a.
Just putting balls in holes, guys.
just a
putting
dude
balls in
trying to
holes.
put a
That's-
ball in a hole.
Just balls in holes, boys. That's all we're doing.
Yep, that's what we're doing. But like, why is that fun? I mean, it's fun because it's challenging,
Yeah.
and that's kind of the same.
You
reason
know
why
what I
it's
would
fun.
contest? I think that ice cold beer is good because it feels
and
like it
challenging.
feels really good. Like the controls are really great. That's the thing about ice cold beer that's incredible. Whenever you make a mistake in ice cold beer, it is your fault. You did this to yourself. If the cabinet is functioning properly, which they almost never are. But
So then your logic is false.
no, but I mean, like the joy of that game is really controlling it, and feeling like you've developed a sense of control over something that initially seems very uncontrollable. That's what's great about that game to me. I think challenge is a component, but I don't think challenge alone makes a good game. Like Dan, I was thinking about this with Bennett Foddy's Getting Over It.
True. Well, but Bennett Foddy's Getting Over It is made to be intentionally frustrating. Like the control scheme is very simple, but they made it difficult in order to make you realize, and that's kind of the point of the game, is like, hey, you have to get over the fact that this game is very difficult and just try it and see if you can finish it. You know?
Did you finish it?
No, are you kidding me?
I
gave
don't
up
know.
almost immediately.
Well, so do you feel like it's a good game? Did it accomplish what it set out
I
to
think
accomplish?
it was an
or-
interesting experience. I wouldn't say it was a good game in
Ooh.
particular, because a lot of people downloaded it and a lot of streamers played it for a while. But have you heard anything about it recently?
No, but the reason that it interests me is because it's another thing that I feel like had a very focused intent when it started. It, like you said, it set out to be a hard game that's hard, and it within that wanted to like it, because aren't there like encouragements when you lose? It's like, don't worry, you should try
There are.
again.
That's why it's called Getting Over It, because it's basically about, like, this game is unbelievably difficult. They made it to be almost impossible to finish. And then the whole time there's this guy, Bennett Foddy, who's like telling you the whole time, like, it's like, you know what? It's okay to sometimes fail, because whenever you do, you know there's a chance for you to get over it and continue going with everything else that you're doing.
I think there's another way you could interpret that, though. Couldn't you also say that it's like it's okay to fail, and the goal of getting over it is maybe not to beat getting over it, but is maybe to accept the idea that failure is okay. It's a part of life. It's a part of being, and you get over it.
Now you're getting too deep. And
Well, I
I'm going
wonder if
to
that's
leave.
legitimately the point, and if so,
Probably.
like that is fucking brilliant. That
We'd
right
have to-
there, I would
we'd
call
have
it a
to
good game just on
talk
the
to them
strength of
about
that.
We'd have to talk to them about that, because maybe, and if it is, then Jesus H. Christ, is that amazing that they did
Dan,
that?
please don't.
I
take
think
the
all
Lord's
this is
name
so
in vain.
relative. I mean, what makes a good game depends on the mood, the day of the week, how much beer you've had.
Guys, you want to play
it's also
tic-tac-toe? I'm for it.
it's also relative. But at the end of the
Fucking
day,
Foursquare.
I also think that it can be brought down to the simple word of engagement. Does it engage you on whatever level you need to be engaged on, whether that's a simple distraction or engrossment in a story or exploration? And I think that's at its core what makes a game good.
Does
Because
the
what's
number
good today may not be good tomorrow. I mean, go back and watch the Power Rangers movies from when we were kids. They're not.
No, you
Sorry.
shut up. They're
They're
great.
not.
I
No.
love those movies.
Does a game being good have anything to do with how many people are playing it?
On a grand scale, like societally good, yeah, like Fortnite's great because everybody plays it.
I wouldn't agree with that, William. Because because I don't
Bad
think
things
that,
are popular. Like heroin
thi-
is incredibly popular,
right, and it's still not something
Some
that you
people
can
really like heroin and they think it's good.
but it's
It's
not.
true,
I think we
but
can
it's
all
not.
agree.
Not for you, it's not.
It's not good for you. Damn it! I don't know. Now I've been twisted all on my butt side.
Well,
I don't
mean,
know.
it reminds me of like we were talking about Jay and Silent Bob's Strike Back. I think once.
It's true. Yes, we were
That
last
is-
episode.
that is
yeah.
an
Yeah, Goodwill
objectively bad-
Hunting
Yeah,
2.
Hunting season. Yeah.
that movie is not Goodwill Hunting. Jay and Silent Bob's Strike Back is objectively not a good movie, but I still enjoy it because I
Sure.
like those characters because they mean something to me.
But I'm not asking if it's enjoyable to you. I'm asking if it's objectively good.
Well, that's two different things. If
That
I
is two
enjoy
different
it, is it good?
It could be, but it doesn't necessarily mean it is.
No, but
Let's
like
get
if
on.
I enjoy something, then it is good for me at that time.
Well,
It's the
I
same
think
thing about
let's-
Will, where he doesn't like a good game. It's the same thing.
Again, but I think Ian's saying objectively, like, is there a checklist of items or things that we can put on something that objectifies games for all people and says, this is good because it meets these objectives, as opposed to subjective, like for me, for you, for him, for her? Is there a set objective list?
I
makes
don't
games
think
good?
so. Will, I don't think there is. I don't think there is a thing that we can say this makes a good game because
I would
no
agree
one
with
thought a game about a goat just licking things and jumping off of stuff would be a good game.
What about I Am Bread?
Exactly. Who thought that a game about being bred climbing up stuff would be a good game? Nobody. But there's a large majority of people who
You just played
enjoy
Shower with
playing.
Your Dad Simulator, and same thing.
Exactly. Who thought showering with your dad could be a good game? And it is. It's fun as shit to shower with your dad Simulator 2015. You know? And I think that's what we should take away from this, is that there is no real objectively good game. It's basically what you think is fun is fun.
I agree.
You know? I hate checkers, but
I think there are objectively good games, but it's more what matters more is your subjective opinion on them.
Well, I think a lot of those subjective opinions are also so ubiquitous that's why we have things like IGN and GameStop and Review People and Polygon, because they're so similar. There's certain similarities that bridge from person to person that it's enough. There's enough of it out there to sort of justify, oh, this is an 8 out of 10, which I always interpret as roughly 80% of the people out there will like this game. That's not how it's intended. That's just how I always take that.
All right. Well, I think that's going to be it from us at the Objectively Good GameBrew podcast. So that's going to be it for us. Say goodnight, everybody.
Good night.
good night, everybody.
Everybody. Play Magic.